the dog, the garden, and the breaking point. In today's video, we bring you a dramatic and intense story about a woman who was pushed to her breaking point by a seemingly small yet incredibly frustrating issue. Meet Mai, a woman with a fiery temper who values her peace and quiet, especially when it comes to her beloved garden. However, her calm and well-maintained sanctuary is constantly disrupted by the playful antics of her neighbor's dog, Max. What starts as a simple annoyance quickly escalates into a heated confrontation, leading to an unexpected intervention from the police. Watch as Mai, driven by frustration, finally takes matters into her own hands, no more holding back. Will this be the breaking point that forces a resolution, or is this just the beginning of a bigger clash? Stay tuned to see how it all unfolds. Mai had always been a woman of strong opinions and fiery emotions. Her life in the small suburban neighborhood was, for the most part, peaceful, at least until recently. For years, she had found solace in the tranquility of her well-kept garden, where the sunlight kissed her flower beds and the soft breeze played with the branches of her favorite trees. It was her sanctuary, a place of calm and personal fulfillment. But recently, that peace had been shattered, and the source of her frustration was none other than her neighbor's mischievous dog. The dog, a playful, overly energetic cocker spaniel named Max, had made it a habit of running loose in the neighborhood, and most often, it found its way into Mai's meticulously cared-for garden. The playful antics of Max, though innocent in nature, were anything but harmless. He had taken it upon himself to dig up the soil, chew on the vibrant flowers that Mai had planted with such care, and track dirt and mud across her pristine flower beds. Every time Mai stepped outside, she found herself facing another wreckage, another small disaster she had to clean up. It wasn't just a mess, it was the invasion of her personal space, a boundary she had carefully built around her. Mai wasn't one to back down easily. She had always been assertive, sometimes to the point of being aggressive, especially when it came to her personal space and property. She believed in standing up for herself and didn't care much for what others thought of her outbursts. If something was bothering her, she had no hesitation in confronting the issue head-on. And this time, her patience had worn thin. She was fed up with Max's constant mischief. She had tried to be understanding at first, thinking that perhaps it was just a phase, or maybe the dog had gotten out once by accident. But as the days went on and the damage continued to mount, her frustration began to boil over. The final straw came one bright Saturday morning. Mai woke up early, as she always did, eager to tend to her flowers. But when she opened her back door, the sight that greeted her sent a wave of anger rushing through her veins. Max had once again turned her garden into a mess of uprooted plants, dug up soil, and chewed leaves. The anger welled up inside her like a tidal wave, and for the first time in a long while, she couldn't hold it in any longer. She grabbed her gardening gloves, marched out the door, and headed straight for her neighbor's house. Her heart pounded as she walked. She could feel the blood rushing to her face, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She was determined to resolve this, once and for all. If they won't keep their dog under control, then I will make them listen, she muttered under her breath, her voice tight with anger. The house she was heading toward was a modest, well-kept one, with a white picket fence surrounding a small yard. Her neighbor, Mr. Thanh, was a quiet man, always polite but reserved, and Mai had never had any real issues with him before. She had seen him many times, waving hello as he watered his plants or took out the trash. But today was different. Today, she wasn't going to be the quiet, understanding neighbor. Today, she was going to confront him. As she reached his doorstep, she paused for a moment. The familiar sounds of the neighborhood, the chirping birds, the rustling leaves in the breeze, seemed to fade away. All she could hear was the sharp pounding of her own heart and the low growl of Max on the other side of the fence. She could feel her hands trembling as she lifted them to press the doorbell. The time for patience had passed. The time for action had come. A moment later, Mr. Thanh appeared at the door, a friendly smile on his face. But the moment he saw Mai standing there, red-faced and visibly upset, his expression shifted. "Mai? What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. Mai didn't even give him a chance to finish his sentence. "Your dog," she exclaimed, her voice rising in frustration. Your dog is ruining my garden. This is the third time this week. I've had enough. How many more times do I have to tell you to keep him inside? Mr. Thanh blinked, clearly taken aback by her outburst. I'm really sorry, but I don't think he's been causing that much trouble, he began, trying to stay calm. Not that much trouble? Mai's voice cracked with indignation. You have no idea what it's like to work so hard on something, only to have it ruined by a dog that has no manners. Do you even care about your neighbors? This is the third time, Mr. Thanh. How many more flowers do I have to lose before you do something about it? Her words were sharp, her anger like fire, and Mr. Than's face reddened as she continued. I can't stand it anymore. I've tried being nice, I really have, but now I've had enough. This dog is out of control and so are you. As Mai ranted, the tension in the air grew thicker. Mr. Than's calm demeanor faltered slightly, and his hands began to fidget at his sides. Before he could finish, the unmistakable sound of a siren pierced through the air, followed by the flashing lights of a police car pulling up to the curb. Mai stopped mid-sentence, her anger still simmering beneath the surface, but her attention now drawn to the unexpected arrival. The police car came to a halt, and a uniformed officer stepped out. Is there a problem here? The officer asked, glancing between Mai and Mr. Thanh. Mai, not missing a beat, immediately pointed at the fence, her voice tinged with frustration. Yes, officer. This dog is constantly in my garden, causing damage. I've asked the owner multiple times to control it, but nothing changes. I'm fed up. The officer nodded and turned to Mr. Thanh, who had gone pale at the situation. I'm really sorry, officer, Mr. Thanh said quickly, trying to stay composed. I didn't know it was causing this much trouble. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. The officer looked at both of them and sighed. Okay, let's calm down and sort this out. It's important that neighbors try to resolve their issues without letting things escalate. Mr. Thanh, please make sure your dog stays inside, or we might have to take further action. With a reluctant nod, Mr. Thanh agreed, clearly realizing the severity of the situation. Mai, still seething but now more composed, gave him one last glare before turning on her heel. As she walked back to her house, she felt a mixture of relief and bitterness. The issue had been resolved, at least for now, but something told her that this wasn't the last time she'd have to deal with a problem like this. As the officer left and Mr. Thanh closed his door, Mai stood in her yard, staring at her flowers. She wasn't sure if the situation had been truly resolved, but at least for today, she had made her point. Mai had always been a woman known for her strong opinions and fiery temperament. It wasn't that she sought conflict, but when something bothered her, it would simmer beneath the surface until it boiled over. Today, that simmering rage was ignited by a seemingly small but extremely aggravating issue, the persistent behavior of her neighbor's dog. This was not the first time, nor would it be the last, but today was different. Today, Mai could no longer hold it in. It had been a slow build-up. For months, Mai had watched with growing frustration as her neighbor's cocker spaniel, Max, wreaked havoc in her garden. At first, she tried to brush it off. After all, dogs would be dogs. But Max wasn't just a harmless puppy who occasionally trotted through her yard. No, he was a menace, a small ball of energy that had made it his life mission to destroy her hard work. She had tried everything. She had politely mentioned it to her neighbor, Mr. Thanh, the quiet, reserved man who lived next door. But his promises to keep Max under control were nothing more than empty words. Max, it seemed, was above any form of discipline. The final straw came early one Saturday morning. Mai had woken up earlier than usual, eager to tend to her garden before the summer heat kicked in. The sunlight streamed through her kitchen window, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. The garden was her pride and joy, a place where she could escape the stresses of her life, a place that felt entirely hers. She had nurtured it for years, carefully selecting the flowers, arranging them just so, ensuring that each plant had the right amount of care and attention. It was her sanctuary, and no one, not even her own family, could disturb the peace she found there. But as Mai stepped outside, what she saw sent a jolt of anger through her body. The garden, which she had spent weeks perfecting, was in ruins. Max had been there again. The ground was dug up, the flowers were trampled, and there were signs of the dog's mischief everywhere. Her heart raced as she surveyed the damage. It wasn't just a few stray paw prints or some torn leaves, it was as though Max had deliberately set out to destroy everything she had worked so hard for. "Not again," Mai muttered, her voice shaking with fury. She could feel her hands trembling at her sides as she bent down to examine the destruction. Her favorite rose bush had been torn from its roots, and her delicate lilies were flattened beneath the weight of the dog's playful antics. Each of her plants had been carefully chosen, some grown from seeds, others nurtured from cuttings gifted to her by friends and family. To see them destroyed in an instant was a blow she couldn't easily absorb. Mai stood up, her breath quickening as the frustration began to mount. "How dare they?" she thought. "How many times do I have to ask? This is unacceptable." She had been patient before, even when the damage was minimal. But this was too much. It wasn't just about the plants. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. And her neighbor, Mr. Thanh, had crossed that line far too many times. Mai's mind raced as she replayed all the times she had tried to address the issue politely. "I'll handle it, don't worry," he had said, his calm voice offering empty assurances. She had given him the benefit of the doubt, time and time again, hoping he would follow through. But he hadn't. And now, after months of broken promises and countless ruined flowers, she had reached her breaking point. She stormed back inside her house, slamming the door behind her. Her heart thudded in her chest, her frustration palpable. She tried to calm herself, but it was impossible. She paced back and forth, gripping the edge of her kitchen counter, clenching her fists. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. How could Mr. Thanh be so careless? Didn't he realize the value of what she had worked so hard to create? Didn't he understand that his dog was ruining her peace? Mai grabbed her jacket, barely thinking about the consequences. She wasn't going to let this go any longer. She had been patient for far too long, and now she was ready to take action. Her pulse quickened as she made her way to the front door, her mind set on one thing, confronting her neighbor once and for all. As she walked across her yard, the familiar sounds of the neighborhood, children playing, the hum of distant conversations, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, did little to calm her. Her eyes were fixed on the house next door, and her mind was set on what she was going to say. She wasn't going to be polite anymore. She wasn't going to hold back. Reaching the front gate of Mr. Than's house, Mai paused for just a moment. The sight of Max running around in the backyard, tail wagging, only fueled her anger further. "This ends now," she muttered, her words sharp and final. She marched up to the door and rang the doorbell, her finger pressing the button with such force that she felt as if she were slamming it against the wall. When the door opened, she barely gave Mr. Thanh a chance to speak. "Your dog," she began, her voice dripping with anger, "is destroying my garden. Again." Mr. Thanh looked momentarily taken aback. He had known Mai to be assertive, but he had never seen her this angry. "Mai, he began, but she cut him off. "I've asked you, politely, more than once to keep him inside. But every single day, I find my garden destroyed, my flowers trampled. Do you even care about the damage he's causing? This is my property, my hard work, and I can't keep letting him ruin it." Mai's words tumbled out in a rush, and with each sentence, her anger seemed to grow. Her face flushed with frustration, her hands clenched at her sides. "This is the third time this week, Mr. Thanh. How many times do I have to say it before you do something about it?" Mr. Than's face fell. He opened his mouth to apologize, but Mai wasn't having it. "You promised me you'd keep him under control. Do you even remember that? But no, here we are again, with another ruined garden. I am done with this." Escalation and tension. As Mai continued her rant, she could feel the heat rising in her chest. Her words had become sharper, louder, and her anger had completely taken over. This wasn't just about the dog anymore. It was about respect, about boundaries, and about the fact that she had been ignored for far too long. The more she spoke, the more convinced she became that Mr. Thanh was never going to take her seriously unless she took drastic action. Her frustration reached a boiling point, and in that moment, she couldn't hold back anymore. She pointed an accusatory finger at the dog, who had stopped running to watch her. "I want something done about this now. If you don't do something, I will. I'm not going to let this continue." The arrival of the police. Just as Mai's voice reached its peak, the unmistakable sound of a siren pierced the tension in the air. A police car had pulled up at the curb. The sirens wailed as the vehicle came to a stop in front of Mr. Than's house. Mai turned around, her heart still pounding from the anger she had unleashed. The last thing she had expected was for the police to get involved. A uniformed officer stepped out of the car, surveying the situation. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm and professional. Mai, still boiling with fury, immediately began to explain the situation. "This dog has been destroying my garden for months. I've asked the owner multiple times to control it, but nothing's changed. I've had enough of this." The officer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Thanh, it seems like there's been a misunderstanding here. We'll need to address this properly to ensure this doesn't happen again." In the end, the officer's intervention helped to calm the situation. Mr. Thanh promised to keep Max indoors, and Mai, while still frustrated, felt a small sense of relief. The issue was finally addressed, but it had taken far more than she had ever imagined. Mai realized that sometimes, when frustration builds up, it can take something drastic to get the attention you need. While her garden was safe for now, she couldn't help but wonder, would this situation really be resolved, or would it flare up again? In the aftermath, as the police car drove away and Mr. Thanh closed his door, Mai stood in her yard, gazing at the flowers once again. The air was still, but a lingering tension hung in the air. For now, the battle was over. But Mai knew it wouldn't be long before something else would trigger her fiery temper once again. Mai's fury had now reached a boiling point, and there was no stopping it. As Mr. Thanh stood there, trying to remain calm, she could feel the anger coursing through her veins, pushing her to the brink of losing control. Her face flushed red, her hands trembling with frustration. The damage to her garden felt like a personal betrayal. Her sanctuary, the place where she found solace, had been violated by a creature who didn't even know the meaning of respect. She pointed angrily at Max, the mischievous dog now sitting innocently in the yard, wagging its tail, blissfully unaware of the storm it had caused. "That dog is the problem, Mr. Thanh," she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. I've begged you time and time again, and yet every single day, it's the same story. It's ruining everything I've worked so hard to create. This isn't just a few paw prints, this is destruction." Mr. Thanh, though caught off guard by the intensity of Mai's anger, tried to maintain his composure. "Mai, please, calm down. I told you I would take care of it. It's just a dog being playful. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again," he said, his voice strained but still calm. Mai scoffed at his words. "Calm down? You think I can just calm down when my entire garden is being torn apart every single day? Do you understand how much time and money I've put into that garden? How long I've waited for these flowers to bloom, only for them to be trampled by your dog?" Her voice grew louder with each sentence, and her frustration spilled over like a dam that had been breached. "I'm not some crazy woman yelling over nothing. This is real, Mr. Thanh," she continued, her words now biting and accusatory. "I'm sick of your excuses. You keep saying I'll take care of it, but nothing ever changes. I'm tired of being polite, tired of pretending like this doesn't matter." "Well, it does matter. This garden is my peace, my escape from everything else in life, and you and your dog have ruined it." Her words hung in the air like a sharp sting, and for a moment, the tension between them seemed unbearable. Mai's chest rose and fell rapidly as she stood there, seething. She couldn't believe she had let it get this far. But in that moment, she didn't care. The floodgates of anger had opened, and she was too far gone to take it back now. "Mr. Thanh, clearly caught off guard by the venom in her words, took a step back. "I understand you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle it," he said, his voice softer now, though still tinged with frustration. "I can't just lock him up in the house all the time. He needs space to run, to play." I snapped. "I don't care what he needs, Mr. Thanh. What about what I need? What about my garden? What about my space?" Her eyes were wild now, her heart pounding in her chest, and the words spilled out without a filter. "I've been more than patient, but I can't take it anymore. If you can't control your dog, then I will have to do it myself. I'm done." The argument raged on, with both sides shouting over one another. Mr. Than's calm demeanor began to crack, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "This is ridiculous. You're making a mountain out of a molehill," he finally exclaimed, his voice rising to match Mai's. "It's just a dog, for crying out loud. I've told you I'll handle it, but you won't listen." "Oh, I'm making a mountain out of a molehill?" Mai shot back, her sarcasm dripping with venom. "If this were your property, your precious flowers, you wouldn't be so dismissive. You wouldn't be so willing to just shrug it off like it doesn't matter. This does matter to me, and I am not going to sit here and let you pretend like it's no big deal." The neighbors had started to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some stood in their doorways, peering out from behind curtains, while others stood silently on their porches, watching the verbal battle unfold. Mai didn't care. She was beyond caring. All she wanted was for this madness to end, for someone to finally understand her pain, her frustration, her anger. "I don't care who hears me anymore, Mr. Thanh," Mai yelled, her voice ringing through the quiet suburban street. "This is my property, my garden, and I am done being polite about it. Do something now, or I will." Just as the argument seemed to be escalating further, a sound pierced the air, a siren. At first, it was faint, but then it grew louder, and the unmistakable sight of a police car appeared at the end of the street. The flashing lights reflected off the houses, casting strange shadows in the quiet neighborhood. The neighbors, some with a sense of shock and others with a hint of excitement, watched as the patrol car came to a stop in front of Mai's and Mr. Than's homes. Mai stopped mid-sentence, her breath shallow as she looked at the police car. For a split second, she froze. She had not expected this. She had expected to be heard, to make her point, but not this. Not the police. But then, as the officer stepped out of the car and approached, something inside Mai shifted. The adrenaline was still coursing through her veins, but the presence of authority gave her a moment to pause. The officer, a middle-aged man with a calm and measured expression, surveyed the scene. He looked from Mai, still standing in the yard with her hands clenched in fists, to Mr. Thanh, who stood by his door, looking both embarrassed and defensive. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his voice firm but neutral. "I heard shouting from down the street." Mai didn't wait for Mr. Thanh to respond. She was already speaking, the words rushing out of her like a dam breaking. "This man's dog keeps ruining my garden. I've asked him over and over to keep it inside, but nothing ever changes. I'm sick of it. I've tried to be patient, but enough is enough." The officer turned his attention to Mr. Thanh, who was now looking less confident than he had moments earlier. "Is that true?" the officer asked, his tone shifting slightly as he addressed him directly. "Yes, officer, but it's just a dog. He's playful." "I didn't think it was that serious," Mr. Thanh stammered, clearly flustered by the situation. The officer looked between the two of them, his eyes narrowing. "I understand both sides, but this can't continue. Mai has every right to be upset. And Mr. Thanh, you need to take responsibility for your dog's actions. I suggest you find a solution that works for both of you." Mai's frustration was still palpable, but she couldn't deny that the officer's intervention had brought some clarity to the situation. With a heavy sigh, she crossed her arms, glaring at Mr. Thanh. "I want something done. I don't want to have this conversation again," she stated, her voice still tense but with a hint of finality. Mr. Thanh nodded reluctantly, his earlier defiance now replaced by a reluctant acceptance. "I'll take care of it, Mai. I promise." The dog will stay inside, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." As the officer left and the neighborhood returned to its usual quiet, Mai stood in her yard, her chest still heaving with the remnants of anger. She had won, in a sense, but it hadn't come without a cost. The confrontation, the yelling, the drama, it had all left her exhausted. Still, she felt a strange sense of relief. The situation had been resolved, at least for now. The police had arrived to restore order, but it was Mai's determination that had finally brought the matter to a head. And though the tension lingered in the air, Mai knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't let anything, least of all a mischievous dog, ruin her peace again. The moment the police officer arrived, Mai's seething frustration momentarily shifted focus. The sound of the siren, followed by the flash of the patrol car's lights, was enough to momentarily stun her. The sudden appearance of authority should have calmed her, should have made the situation feel more tangible, more resolvable. But it did the opposite. It only magnified the humiliation she felt, the sting of feeling like she had to call for help to fix what should have been a simple problem, one that her neighbor should have addressed long ago. Her heart raced. Her hands shook with the buildup of anger that had been simmering for weeks. She had reached her breaking point. The officer's calm presence did little to quell the storm inside her. When the officer turned to Mai and asked, "What's going on here?" his neutral tone felt like a trigger to her. It was almost as though the world was watching, as though everyone around her was judging her outburst, questioning her reasons for being so angry. The thought of her emotions being examined so closely, by the officer, by her neighbors, even by Mr. Thanh, made her blood boil. Before he could even ask for more details, Mai blurted out, voice trembling with rage, "This dog. This damn dog has ruined everything I've worked for. It's not just a mess. Do you have any idea how much work I've put into that garden?" Her words came out faster than she could control them, like a floodgate opening wide. She wasn't thinking anymore. It was as if her body was moving of its own accord, pulled by the anger that had been building inside her for so long. She felt her face flush, her throat tighten with the pressure of everything she had kept inside for weeks, and now, there was no turning back. The officer glanced over at Mr. Thanh, his eyes narrowing slightly, then turned back to Mai. He seemed to understand her frustration, but he wasn't in the position to take sides. "Mai, I understand you're upset," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "but we need to find a calm way to work through this." "Calm?" Mai scoffed loudly, the bitterness in her voice growing with each word. "You expect me to stay calm? After everything? This has gone on for months, officer. Months. And I'm the one who has to stay calm while this man lets his dog run wild through my property, ruining everything I've worked for. I've asked him so many times. I've been polite, I've been patient, and all I get are empty promises." Her voice cracked with fury as she spoke, and she could feel herself spiraling, unable to pull herself back from the edge. The officer took a step forward, trying to defuse the situation, but Mai's anger wasn't something that could be quieted so easily. Her whole body was rigid with frustration, and her eyes were blazing with indignation. "You have no idea what it's like, officer." Mai's voice rose higher, each word harder to contain. "I spend hours, tending to that garden. I planted those flowers with my own hands. I carefully arranged every single plant, hoping to create something beautiful, something peaceful. And all it takes is one dog to come in and destroy it in an instant. It's like he doesn't care." "You don't care." Mr. Thanh had begun to speak up, but Mai wasn't listening to him anymore. His calm voice only seemed to amplify the injustice she was feeling, as though he was minimizing her pain, her effort. She wasn't just mad at the dog anymore, she was mad at everything, at the world, at her helplessness, at being ignored. It wasn't just about the garden anymore, it was about respect, about boundaries that had been crossed, about being made to feel small in her own home. Her chest heaved with each breath. She could hear the soft murmurs of the neighbors from their windows, the judgmental stares of people watching a spectacle they didn't fully understand. They didn't know the history, didn't know the constant pain of seeing something she cared for being torn apart by an animal who wasn't even her own. But even as she raged, Mai knew one thing: she was right. She was the one who had suffered. She had every right to be angry, every right to demand respect. No one could tell her that she wasn't justified in feeling this way. As the officer turned back to Mr. Thanh, she felt a coldness settle over her. The distance between them seemed to grow, and she could feel the wall she had built around herself solidifying. She had hoped for a simple resolution, a quick fix. Instead, she was standing there, baring her soul, confronting everything she had tried to suppress. The officer's neutrality, Mr. Than's weak attempts at calming her, it all felt like an insult. The officer addressed Mr. Thanh with a firm but understanding tone. "Mr. Thanh, it's clear there's been some ongoing frustration here. We need to resolve this calmly and promptly." But Mai couldn't hear the rest of his words, her thoughts drowning out everything else. All she could think of was how she had been forced into this position, how her peaceful life had been shattered by an animal that was allowed to run wild and ruin everything she had worked for. The anger built, rising higher with every word spoken. She wasn't done yet. "No," she said sharply, cutting off the officer's attempt to calm the situation. "I won't accept a calm resolution, not anymore. I've tried that already. I've given him chance after chance to fix this, and nothing changes. I am not waiting for him to promise again and then go home and do nothing. This is my property, my garden, and no one is going to let some damn dog ruin it." Mr. Than's face hardened as he realized that Mai was no longer willing to back down. The officer stepped in between them, his hand gently raised in an attempt to stop the verbal exchange from escalating further. "All right, we need to take a step back," he said, his tone firmer. "Mai, I understand your frustration. But this can be resolved without escalating it further." But it was too late for that. Mai's words, fueled by weeks of building tension and pain, continued to spill out, louder and sharper than before. The officer could see that the situation had spiraled too far for a simple resolution. He glanced at Mr. Thanh, silently indicating that the problem would need a more serious solution. A moment of clarity. The back and forth between Mai and Mr. Thanh grew more intense. They shouted over each other, neither willing to give an inch. The officer stood silently, his role now to mediate the situation, knowing that any wrong move could make it all unravel further. In the heat of the moment, Mai's mind started to clear just slightly. She could feel the weight of her words, the heat rising in her chest. She wasn't just angry at Mr. Thanh, or the dog. She was angry at herself. How had it come to this? How had a simple request turned into this explosive conflict? Was she too much? Was she being unreasonable? The officer's calm voice broke through the haze in her mind. "Mai," he said softly, "this can be solved without this kind of anger. We just need to work through it." For the first time, Mai took a deep breath. Her fists unclenched, her body deflated slightly. The words that had once felt so empowering now felt empty. The officer had given her the space to calm down, to reflect. The anger still smoldered, but now, it was mixed with a sense of exhaustion. She knew she wasn't done, she couldn't let this go unresolved. But she had to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to make things better without letting her anger continue to define her. The officer, seeing the situation escalate beyond the point of resolution, took a slow, deliberate step forward. His calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the fiery tension between Mai and Mr. Thanh. His presence, while neutral, had a weight to it. He was the bridge between a full-blown confrontation and something that could be resolved, or at least contained, without it spiraling further into chaos. Mai stood there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes still flashing with the intensity of her anger. The officer, a seasoned professional, was used to handling situations like these, but even he could sense that this was no ordinary neighborhood spat. This was something deeper, something personal. His training kicked in, and with a slow, measured voice, he spoke again, aiming to diffuse the building tension. "All right," the officer began, his tone firm but not unfriendly, "let's calm down. Both of you. Mai, I understand your frustration. I get it, really. No one wants to have their property ruined, especially after being patient for so long. But shouting and threatening aren't going to solve this. Mai's chest heaved with every breath, the pressure of her frustration mounting. She had been patient, as the officer said, but not any longer. Her mind was clouded with emotion, and her throat ached from holding back so much for so long. She knew she had gone too far, but in that moment, the truth didn't matter. What mattered was that this had gone on for far too long. "I've been patient for months," Mai snapped, cutting the officer off. "Months of asking politely, months of waiting for him to take care of it. I've watched my flowers, my life's work, get destroyed every single time that dog gets loose. And now you expect me to just let it slide? To keep calm?" Her voice was high-pitched now, almost breaking as the raw emotion in her voice carried. The officer, still composed, didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. Instead, he waited, his eyes locked onto hers, steady and patient. He could tell this wasn't just about a dog anymore, this was about something far more personal. Her pride, her work, and her sense of fairness had been trampled on just as thoroughly as her garden. "I'm not asking you to let it slide," the officer responded calmly. "What I am asking is for us to find a solution here without escalating it further. I can't have a situation like this turning into something worse." Mai was shaking now, and as much as she wanted to shout more, her body refused. She had reached the limits of her physical and emotional endurance. Her vision blurred slightly, the tears she had been holding back threatening to spill. She wasn't a person who cried easily. But everything was building up, years of unacknowledged hard work, months of unresolved tension, and now this. Her outburst had finally reached its peak, and the emotions were spilling over like a flood that had been long dammed. She turned toward Mr. Thanh, her anger still seething beneath the surface, but something in the officer's voice had softened her resolve. "This isn't just a dog problem," she said through gritted teeth. "This is about being heard. It's about respect for what I've built here. I've worked hard for this garden, and I won't let anyone take it away from me, not even you." Mr. Than's expression had softened too, but there was an unmistakable trace of guilt now in his eyes. He had been quiet through most of the exchange, but he couldn't avoid the truth anymore. The frustration he had once tried to dismiss now seemed far more real, far more urgent. "I understand, Mai. I do. I haven't meant to ignore your requests," he said, his voice calmer now but tinged with regret. "I didn't realize it had gone this far, but you're right. I should have done more. I should have controlled Max better. I'm sorry." The apology, while sincere, didn't immediately calm Mai. She was still angry, still raw from the weeks of feeling disregarded. But there was something in Mr. Than's voice that made her pause. It wasn't the usual dismissive tone she had heard in the past, but a genuine acknowledgement of her pain. For the first time, he was actually listening. It didn't fix the problem, but it made the moment feel like something tangible, something that could be addressed. Slowly, her clenched fists began to loosen, but the anger still lingered, like a smoldering fire that hadn't been fully extinguished. The officer, sensing the tension easing, stepped back slightly and spoke again, this time turning to both of them. "What we need is a solution. Mr. Thanh, you need to make sure Max stays inside or within a confined area where he can't get to Mai's property. And Mai, I know it's difficult, but I need you to allow Mr. Thanh some time to follow through on this. If it happens again, then we can take further steps." Mai looked at the officer, her chest still tight with frustration, but she could feel herself backing down. The solution was simple: her garden needed protection, and Mr. Thanh needed to be held accountable for his dog. But in the end, Mai knew the officer was right. This wasn't something she could keep fighting in the same way. She had to let it go, at least for now. "I'll give him the time," she said reluctantly, her voice softer but still laced with frustration. "But if this happens again, I'm not going to just stand by." The officer nodded, taking a step back as he turned to leave. "All right then, I'll leave you both to figure this out. I hope it doesn't escalate again. If it does, we'll have to involve animal control or further legal action." As the officer drove away, the weight of the situation began to sink in for Mai. The adrenaline that had fueled her outburst started to fade, and she felt the sting of embarrassment creeping in. She had been heard, but at what cost? She had shouted, lashed out, and nearly caused a scene in front of everyone. Was it worth it? Looking back at Mr. Thanh, who stood awkwardly in his doorway, she could see that he was still processing what had just happened. Mai, for her part, felt a mixture of relief and lingering tension. She wasn't happy with the outcome, but at least it was something. At least now, there was a commitment to change, to make sure Max would stay away from her garden. But the battle hadn't been easy, and Mai knew that deep down, this was only the beginning of a new type of relationship with her neighbors. One where patience, respect, and communication would need to replace her quick temper and explosive reactions. For now, though, the problem had been resolved, at least for the time being. As she turned back toward her garden, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what had just transpired, and though the issue was resolved, Mai knew that some conflicts weren't so easily forgotten. The minutes after the officer left were filled with an uncomfortable silence. Mai stood there in the middle of her garden, her hands still clenched into tight fists, and her heart pounding from the storm of emotions that had just passed. She could hear the faint chirping of birds in the distance, the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze, but it all felt distant, like she was no longer part of the peaceful neighborhood she had once known. Now, it seemed as though every step she took, every breath she drew, was weighed down by the confrontation. Her eyes drifted to the flowers that had once been her pride and joy. The damage from Max's antics was still visible, though not as severe as it had been in the past. The chaos, the dirt, the broken stems, everything was there, a reminder of how much her calm had been shattered. Despite the officer's involvement, despite the promises made, Mai felt a gnawing sense of dissatisfaction. Her emotions still swirled within her, but she knew deep down that she couldn't hold on to that rage forever. What had happened was irreversible, but there was a way forward, however begrudgingly she would have to accept it. Turning slowly, she glanced toward Mr. Than's house. He had returned inside, likely still processing what had just happened. She could feel his eyes on her from behind his curtains, watching her every move. The weight of the situation hung heavily in the air, an invisible barrier between them. She wondered if he truly understood her frustration, or if he saw her as nothing more than an unreasonable woman who had exploded over a simple problem. But for Mai, it was never just about the dog. It was about feeling invisible, unappreciated, and powerless in her own home. It was about boundaries that, to her dismay, had been crossed time and time again. With a deep breath, Mai walked back into her house, each step heavy with the weight of what had transpired. She kicked off her shoes at the door and slumped onto the couch. Her mind replayed every moment of the confrontation, the sharp words, the harsh tone, the crackling tension in the air. But there was something else there, something buried beneath the layers of frustration. It was guilt. The guilt of letting her emotions take control, of losing herself in the heat of the moment. She knew she hadn't handled it well. But, for once, Mai felt conflicted. She had been heard. She had made her point. But was it worth the cost? Was the destruction of her peace worth the small victory of making Mr. Thanh listen? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Mai's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? She stood up quickly, her mind racing, and walked toward the door. As she opened it, she was surprised to find Mr. Thanh standing there, looking a bit unsure of himself. He had his hands in his pockets, and his expression was apologetic, his head slightly tilted in a gesture of remorse. Mai, I just wanted to come over and apologize again for everything, he said, his voice quieter than usual. I know I messed up. I shouldn't have let things get to this point. I've been thinking about what you said, and I realize I should have been more considerate of your space, your garden. Mai stared at him for a moment, her lips pressed tightly together. She wasn't sure how to respond. Was this real? Was he genuinely sorry, or was this just an attempt to smooth things over? She had been prepared for him to brush it off, for him to make excuses and deny the seriousness of the situation, but this apology, this openness, was unexpected. I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately, he continued, shifting uncomfortably. I know it's been a lot to deal with, but I want to make it right. I'll take full responsibility. I'll get a better fence to keep Max in, and I'll make sure he stays inside when I can't supervise him. I promise, this won't happen again. For the first time, Mai could feel the intensity of her anger begin to subside. She could see in Mr. Tan's eyes the sincerity she hadn't expected. The apology wasn't just about the dog anymore. It was about understanding, about respect, and that, more than anything, was what she had needed. I appreciate you saying that, Mai said finally, her voice softening. But you have to understand that this wasn't just about the dog. It was about feeling like no one was listening, like my space didn't matter. It wasn't just the garden, it was how I felt like I wasn't being heard. I didn't want to explode. I didn't want things to get this far. But I needed you to see how much this meant to me. Mr. Tan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I get it now. And I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't being heard. That's the last thing I ever wanted. There was a pause between them, a moment of mutual understanding. For all the chaos and the hurt, something about this exchange felt like a turning point. Mai still felt a residual sting of frustration, but it was softer now, more bearable. Maybe it wasn't just about the dog. Maybe it was about trust, about communication, and about knowing when to let go of the past and move forward. Thank you, Mai finally said, her voice quieter now. I'll hold you to it. I don't want to go through this again. Of course, Mr. Tan replied with a nod. And if you ever feel like there's another issue, just let me know right away. Mai took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight in her chest lifted. The conversation had not been easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it had been necessary. There was still work to be done, there was still the garden to tend to, the relationship to rebuild, but for now, the issue had been resolved. As Mr. Tan walked away, Mai stood in her doorway, watching him leave. She looked down at her garden, taking in the sight of the damaged flowers. They weren't perfect anymore. They were scarred, broken in places. But they were still there. They would heal. And so would she. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better, a lesson in patience, and understanding, and in the importance of standing up for yourself, but also knowing when to let go. As Mai closed the door, she felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. It wasn't the peace she had hoped for initially, but it was enough. And for now, that was enough. In the end, the confrontation between Mai and Mr. Tan became a turning point for both of them. Mai's fiery temper, once uncontrollable, was met with a sincere apology and an understanding she hadn't expected. The issue with the dog, though seemingly small, had been a catalyst for deeper emotions about boundaries, respect, and being heard. The argument, fueled by months of frustration, had ultimately opened the door to real communication. Mai realized that while she had every right to be angry, there was more to resolving conflict than just expressing that anger. Sometimes, it required patience, understanding, and a willingness to listen. Her garden, though still damaged, symbolized her own emotional growth, a reminder that even in the most heated moments, there was space for resolution and change. As Mai stood there, watching Mr. Tan leave, she understood that true peace didn't come from winning an argument but from finding common ground. With the promise of change, both in their relationship and the situation with the dog, Mai felt a sense of closure. The storm had passed, and though the road ahead might not be perfect, it was a step toward a more harmonious future.